This week, you are going to be introduced to the writing of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was part of a movement in America called Transcendentalism. The people involved in this movement were known as Transcendentalists. In order to better understand the literature associated with this movement, and specifically Emerson, we need to have a background on Transcendentalists. Who were Transcendentalists? They were a generation of well-educated people. Okay? They lived in the decades before the Civil War, and they were mostly New Englanders centered around Boston. So we're dealing with a group of people who are pretty centralized in one area and who have an education beyond that of your normal American during this time period. What did they want to do? They wanted to create literature that was uniquely American and that was not like literature found in other areas of the world. In America at this time, we had such an interesting makeup of our population. People from all over the world with different backgrounds having come to America. So really, at this point in time, creating American literature would be symbolic of who we were and who we were becoming as a people. And because of the differences in the backgrounds of Americans, our literature was going to be very different from that found throughout the rest of the world. In addition, they wanted to define spirituality and religion. These were important parts and principles of the background of the people who had come to America for a new life. So it was important that that the Transcendentalists begin to define what it meant to be spiritual, what it meant to have religion. What did they believe? They believed that all people had access to divine inspiration, that all people could be affected directly by God and religion. They felt that all should be able to seek and love freedom, knowledge, and truth. And that was really the main fundamental components of this movement. The idea of being free and to have choice. The idea of knowledge and enlightenment. And the idea of understanding the truth about life. Not necessarily right or wrong, but the idea of why we exist. They became involved in various social movements, such as the anti-slavery movement, which went back to that idea of freedom, and in women's rights, which lends itself a lot to knowledge and truth, and understanding that's the beginning of some amount of equality between people. Ralph Waldo Emerson, as I said, was one of the leading transcendentalists. And that's whose selections we'll be reading this week. He was born in 1803 and lived until 1882. The height of the Transcendentalist movement was about 1840 to 1860. So right that 20 years or so, 10-20 years right before the Civil War. He was originally a Unitarian minister. He left the ministry due to his own personal spiritual crisis after the death of his wife. She died of tuberculosis, and he had a hard time dealing with her being taken from him. Once he left the ministry, that's when he began his career as a lecturer and began to embrace this idea of divine inspiration and the importance of the individual in reaching that divine inspiration. Emerson's main philosophical theories, which you will find within his writing, the first one being the essential perfectibility of the human spirit, that it is possible to reach or work towards this idea of perfection. The unity of the human soul with the divine oversoul. The oversoul you could kind of think of as God, but this connection that we each have with a higher being. And his third philosophical theory being the values of nonconformity, intellectual and spiritual independence, self-reliance, and this idea of utopian friendship. He was immersed in the idea that you be an individual, that you think about yourself and the individualism that comes with you being a person. And these are the kinds of things that he struggled with throughout his writings. For this, that is kind of a brief overview of Transcendentalism and Emerson. We could spend weeks talking about Transcendentalist theory, but unfortunately we don't have that amount of time. And to tell you the truth, it's interesting to a point, but at some point it just becomes completely theory and philosophy, and there's nothing concrete within it. For this week's direct instruction assignment, I just want you to simply list 5 facts that you learned from this presentation. If you need to rewatch this presentation, please do so. And each fact that you give me will be worth 2 points for a total of 10 points. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please make sure that you message me.